For decades, the British monarchy has sold the world a single, polished image. A family united, dutiful, and above the messiness of ordinary life. Every balcony wave and Christmas broadcast is designed to say the same thing. Everything is fine, everything is in order. But behind the ceremony, the relationship between King Charles III and his son and heir, Prince William, has become one of the most quietly scrutinized in modern royal history. This isn't a story built on invented palace leaks or a fabricated secret document that shatters anyone overnight. This is a story built on what has actually been reported, investigated, and, in some cases, confirmed directly by Buckingham Palace itself. A financial scandal that exposed exactly how much money flows into royal pockets, and from whom. A succession dispute over a disgraced prince that has now ended in a genuinely historic outcome. A father managing his own serious health crisis while handing more and more of the monarchy over to his son. And a son who, on primetime television, all but admitted he intends to run the family differently than his father ever did. Let's get into it, piece by piece, and separate what's actually confirmed from what's still just being whispered inside the palace walls. To understand the tension between Charles and William, you have to start with the thing that runs underneath almost every royal relationship: money. Both men are extraordinarily wealthy, but not through salaries or inheritance in the way most people imagine. Charles draws his private income from the Duchy of Lancaster, a sprawling estate dating back to 1265, held in trust for the reigning sovereign. William, as Prince of Wales, draws his income from the Duchy of Cornwall, established in 1337 to fund the heir to the throne. Neither duchy is taxpayer-funded. Both operate on paper as private commercial businesses, collecting rent and striking contracts like any other landlord, except this landlord traces its property rights back to medieval kings who simply seized the land outright. For years, how these two ancient institutions made their money stayed comfortably vague to the public. That changed in November 2024, when the Sunday Times and Channel 4's Dispatches published a 5-month joint investigation. The documentary, titled "The King, the Prince, and Their Secret Millions," combed through more than 5,000 land registry documents connected to both estates. What they found was not a hidden trust or secret inheritance scheme. It was something arguably more uncomfortable. Two of the wealthiest men in Britain quietly profiting from contracts with public bodies, government departments, councils, the armed forces, schools, prisons, and the NHS, including one deal in which the Duchy of Lancaster was paid roughly $829,000 a year to rent a warehouse to an NHS trust for ambulance storage. Reporters also found centuries-old feudal levies still being charged. Fees for crossing certain rivers, bringing cargo ashore, running underwater cables along royal-owned coastline, and even burials on duchy land. The numbers were staggering. In the most recent year covered, the Duchy of Lancaster generated around $27.4 million for Charles, while the Duchy of Cornwall brought in roughly $23.6 million for William. The two duchies had also collected more than $28 million in rent from charities alone over nearly 2 decades. Organizations whose entire purpose is to serve the public, paying rent to two of the richest men in the country just to keep their doors open. It got worse from an optics standpoint. The investigation, working with the Mirror, found a striking share of residential properties managed by both duchies failed to meet basic legal energy efficiency standards. Homes rated F or G, below the minimum E rating landlords have been required to meet since 2020. Roughly 14% of Duchy of Cornwall homes and 13% of Duchy of Lancaster homes fell into that failing category, some reportedly with documented damp and black mold. For William specifically, the criticism cut deeper than finances. His Earthshot Prize has built his public identity around environmental responsibility. The documentary highlighted cases where land under Duchy of Cornwall ownership was tied to carbon emissions that sat awkwardly next to that image. It's one thing to be criticized for being wealthy. It's another to be criticized for a direct contradiction between your public brand and your private dealings. Both duchies issued near-identical statements defending themselves as fully compliant, self-financing commercial entities receiving no direct public funding. A Duchy of Lancaster spokesperson said plainly that it operates as a commercial company complying with all relevant legislation. Technically, all of that was true, but technically legal and publicly palatable are two very different standards, and the gap between them is exactly where this story lives. For Charles, the timing was brutal. He had spent much of his early reign trying to rebrand the monarchy as leaner and more transparent, famously slimming down the working royal family. The Duchy investigation undercut that narrative almost overnight. For William, the stakes were arguably higher. He is the future king, the one whose reputation the institution is betting its next 50 years on. And the documentary landed while he was already trying to position himself as a more modern, relatable version of the monarchy. Neither man broke royal protocol to respond directly. But royal correspondents noted that the fallout forced palace communications teams into full damage control mode, and that the scrutiny reignited a long-simmering public debate about whether these medieval financial arrangements have any place in a 21st century monarchy that regularly asks the public for patience, goodwill, and continued funding through the separate sovereign grant. If money is the quiet, structural tension between Charles and William, Prince Andrew has been the loud one. And unlike almost everything else in this story, this particular thread has an actual, confirmed ending. Andrew's fall from royal grace has been documented for years. The collapse of his public role after a disastrous 2019 television interview, the loss of his military titles and patronages in 2022, and the continued scrutiny over his ties to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and accusations from Virginia Giuffre, which Andrew always denied and settled out of court in 2022. For a long stretch after that, Andrew existed in an awkward royal limbo, no longer working, but still technically a prince, still living rent-free in his 30-room Windsor mansion, Royal Lodge. For years, multiple royal sources described an ongoing disagreement between Charles and William over what to do about that limbo. Reporting from Radar Online characterized it as closer to a power struggle than a simple policy disagreement. One insider said it wasn't only about Andrew's behavior, but about who steers the monarchy's direction. Royal author Andrew Loney said William's view was that his father needed a firmer stance, and that William had no sentimental attachment to his uncle. As future monarch, William was the one who would inherit the fallout. That disagreement has now, in effect, been resolved decisively in William's apparent direction. On October 17, 2025, Andrew announced through a palace statement that he would stop using his remaining titles, including Duke of York, saying the accusations against him were distracting from the king's work. 2 weeks later, on October 30th, the palace went further. A formal statement on behalf of King Charles and Queen Camilla announced Charles had initiated a process to strip Andrew of the style and honors of prince altogether. He would now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The statement confirmed his lease on Royal Lodge was being formally surrendered, and he would move to alternative accommodation. Deliberate censures, the palace said, applying notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. Closing with sympathy for the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. The scale of that move is hard to overstate. Formally stripping an adult royal of the title Prince is close to unprecedented in modern British history. Andrew, who had lived rent-free at Royal Lodge for over 2 decades, was reportedly relocated to a property on the Sandringham estate, and reports suggested he was denied a payout close to $728,000 he'd expected for vacating early. By the following Christmas, he was reportedly barred from the family's Sandringham gathering entirely, while his daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, remained welcome. Whatever private disagreement existed over how firmly to act, the public outcome was about as firm as it gets. Worth noting, Charles, not William, ultimately signed off on and issued the statement stripping his brother's titles, even in a story largely framed around William pushing for a harder line. It was the king who made the final, binding call. But the direction, full removal, full eviction, no remaining protection, lines up closely with the harder line position insiders had long attributed to William. No royal residence carries more emotional weight than Balmoral Castle. It was Queen Elizabeth II's favorite place on earth, where she spent her final summer and where she died in September 2022. For Charles, it's described as his most personal, cherished residence, a direct link to his mother. That emotional weight is exactly what makes reporting around Balmoral so charged. According to sources cited by royal commentator Rob Shooter, Charles has considered opening Balmoral's doors to Harry and Meghan during select family gatherings, a gesture toward healing the rift since they stepped back from royal duties in 2020. One source called it an enormous gesture, a signal of trust from a father who, by multiple accounts, has grown acutely aware of his own mortality since his cancer diagnosis. William, per the same reporting, is said to be strongly opposed, viewing it as too much, too soon, risking wounds that have only just begun to close. It's a notable contrast in instincts. A father facing his own health crisis, motivated to resolve old conflicts while there's still time, and a son far more cautious about extending trust that could be broken again. There's a second, quieter layer to the Balmoral story. William has taken father-son trips to the estate in recent years. Informal, off-the-record visits, deliberately kept off official schedules. But even these haven't escaped speculation. Some sources describe genuine bonding, reportedly the 3rd consecutive year of this kind of private getaway. Others have characterized the same visits as calculated PR, images of unity for a family that, behind closed doors, remains more divided than palace messaging suggests. One insider put it bluntly, "The palace wants images of unity, but father and son are, in reality, miles apart." Layered on top is Harry. Weeks before one of William's Balmoral visits, Charles had a rare, closely watched meeting with Harry at Clarence House, their first sit-down in over a year and a half. William reportedly wasn't consulted and learned of it at the last moment, leaving him blind-sided. Another source reportedly said it sickens William to see his estranged brother regaining ground in their father's affections. Again, precision matters. The internal emotional temperature of these meetings comes from anonymous palace sourcing, not palace press releases. But the underlying facts, that Charles met privately with Harry, that William made separate Balmoral trips around the same period, and that both triggered public speculation, are consistently reported across multiple outlets over time. A stronger signal than any single unverified claim. Running beneath all of this is something far less speculative: Charles's own health, and how directly it has accelerated William's rise inside the institution. In February 2024, Buckingham Palace publicly confirmed King Charles had been diagnosed with a form of cancer, discovered incidentally during treatment for a separate, benign prostate condition. The palace didn't disclose the specific type, citing privacy, but confirmed he'd begun regular treatments and was postponing public duties. This diagnosis is one of the very few pieces of this entire story confirmed directly by the palace, rather than filtered through anonymous sourcing. What followed has been widely reported, if inconsistently detailed, a gradual, then more pronounced shift of public duties from Charles onto William. Over the course of 2024 and into 2025, William visibly increased his workload, representing the monarchy at high-profile international events, including the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris in December 2024, and taking on a growing share of the engagements, foreign policy briefings, and ceremonial responsibilities that would traditionally sit with a reigning monarch. Kate, Princess of Wales, was managing her own cancer diagnosis and treatment through the same period, announced in early 2024, which added further pressure on the couple as they balanced personal health crises with an expanding public role. It's worth being careful here, because this is an area where speculative, low-quality royal news content, much of it algorithmically generated and light on actual sourcing, has filled in dramatic details that were never confirmed by the palace. Specific cancer types, private terminal diagnosis, conversations, and firm succession timelines. None of that has been confirmed by Buckingham Palace, and treating unverified claims like that as fact is exactly the kind of manufactured drama this video is trying to avoid. What is consistently and credibly reported is simpler and arguably more significant on its own. A king managing a serious, ongoing health condition, and a son who has visibly and substantially stepped into more of the day-to-day weight of the monarchy as a direct result. Whatever personal disagreements exist between them, that shift changes the practical balance of power in the relationship. William is no longer just heir apparent in name, he is increasingly heir apparent in daily function. Perhaps the most striking piece of this entire story isn't a leak or an anonymous insider quote at all. It's something William said himself, on camera, to actor and broadcaster Eugene Levy in an interview that aired in October 2025. In a candid, emotionally direct exchange, William spoke openly about the trauma he experienced as a child during his parents' divorce, an era defined by a very public marital breakdown between Charles and Diana, played out under relentless media scrutiny that shaped William's entire adolescence. William didn't just reflect on that period in the abstract. He stated plainly that he intends to avoid repeating what he described as the same mistakes his parents made, both as a husband and as a parent himself. It's a remarkably candid admission for a future king to make about a sitting one, on a mainstream entertainment program rather than in a royal biography written decades later. Royal commentators who have tracked the Charles-William relationship for years described the interview as William effectively confirming, in his own words and without the filter of an anonymous palace insider, that the tensions long rumored between father and son are rooted in something deeper than a single disagreement over Andrew or a single dispute over Balmoral. It's about William actively defining himself, publicly, in contrast to his father, not in outright rebellion, and not with any hostility toward Charles personally, but in a clear, deliberate act of course correction for what kind of king and what kind of father he intends to be. That distinction is worth sitting with. Charles became king carrying the legacy of a public divorce, a family fractured by tabloid scrutiny, and a mother whose own 70-year reign was defined almost entirely by emotional restraint and public silence on private matters. William, by his own account, is watching that legacy closely and choosing, in real time and increasingly in public, what to keep from it and what to leave behind. Put all of these threads together: the Duchy finances, the now resolved Andrew situation, the Balmoral disagreement, Charles's health accelerating William's rise, and William's own on-camera reflections, and a clearer picture starts to form. This isn't a family at war. There's no confirmed shouting match, no dramatic public rupture, no evidence of the kind of tabloid headline-shattering moment that gets manufactured for clicks and thumbnails. What the reporting actually supports is something more realistic, and in some ways, more interesting. A real, ongoing generational shift in how the monarchy is run, playing out through a father who is managing both a fragile public institution and his own health, and a son who is quietly, then increasingly visibly, preparing to run that institution differently. Charles, by multiple accounts, has leaned toward loyalty, discretion, and reconciliation where possible, protective of family bonds even at reputational cost, reaching out to Harry, and only moving to the most severe possible censure of Andrew when public and institutional pressure left him little alternative. William, by multiple accounts, leans toward decisiveness and tighter image control, wanting difficult problems like Andrew resolved cleanly rather than managed indefinitely, wary of moving too fast on reconciliation with Harry and Meghan, and openly committed, in his own words, to not repeating his parents' mistakes. Neither approach is confirmed as simply correct, and both carry real risk for an institution that survives almost entirely on public goodwill rather than any formal political power. The financial scrutiny from the Duchy investigation adds a layer that has nothing to do with personality and everything to do with structure. A reminder that no matter how father and son manage their personal relationship, the monarchy's finances remain a genuine, well-documented point of public tension that isn't going away on its own. What's clear is this: the version of this story that involves secretly renamed trusts, shocking single-document revelations, or a father instantly shattered by one piece of news is not what's actually happening, and treating royal reporting that way does a disservice to a genuinely interesting real story. What's actually happening is slower, messier, and far more human. Two men, one managing his own health while still holding the crown, and one increasingly carrying the day-to-day weight of an institution he'll eventually inherit outright, working through real, documented disagreements about money, family, and legacy in fuller public view than almost any royal generation before them. The British monarchy has always run on the idea of continuity, the illusion that one reign flows seamlessly into the next, that the institution is bigger than any individual disagreement inside it. But continuity has never meant identical. Every king inherits not just a crown, but a set of unresolved problems from the one before him. Charles inherited plenty from his mother, including an institution the public was growing more skeptical of by the year. William, by every credible, well-sourced account available, is already deciding, in disputes over money, over Andrew, over Harry, and increasingly in his own public words, which parts of his father's approach he plans to keep, and which parts he doesn't. That's not a scandal, and it doesn't need to be dressed up as one to matter. That's just what succession actually looks like, once you strip away the manufactured drama and look at what's actually been reported, confirmed, and put on the record.